Do you believe that this is why there's been so much reticence and institutional friction against actually going after Dr. Fauci? Because you can go back into the record and find Dr. Fauci in charge of the biolabs with the Patriot Act funding, in charge of development of bioweapons. His names are on the documents. The website's still available, the Pentagon 1.0, 2002. You can archive the site and you can see it. Dr. Fauci, of course, had major leakage throughout his labs in America. This funding was paid for with Patriot Act dollars. And that Dr. Fauci was in charge of all of this, right? I mean, I don't think people quite understand how easy this mystery is to solve. Do you think that is because of the intel agencies and their culpability here?
What does the mob do when their bag man is picked up? Right?
Got him list, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's like if you look at it, if you look at Dr. Fauci, this is not his first rodeo. Read RFK Jr.'s book. I knew about a lot of that stuff. I'd investigated it before his book came out. And so when his book came out, I was like, oh, hallelujah, right? Like I'm not the only one. There's other people, Del Bigtree, all of these people had studied this and knew this. Dr. Fauci, there's a letter that was written about him by a very famous gay rights activist. And he literally says that Dr. Fauci is a merchant of mass murder, right? Because they figured out, the gay community figured out that what Fauci did later with remdesivir, claiming that remdesivir was the drug that could save you from COVID, when remdesivir was actually poisoning people who had COVID, right? He did the same thing with AZT, which was the drug that they said would save you from HIV. And actually what it did was it mimicked the progression of HIV. So people thought their loved ones were dying from HIV, but they were really dying from AZT. And then if you go back, NBC, when they used to be a real news organization, it was I think it was in the 90s. It might have been the late 80s, but I think it was the 90s. They did a huge expose and a series of stories on how Dr. Fauci was conducting experiments, medical experiments on orphans, and not just any orphans, because by their metric, right, Benny, the lives of little black orphans versus Hispanic orphans, those count more than white orphans, right? If you'd been doing it to little white kids, maybe, today they wouldn't care. But back then, they actually did real journalism and they really cared. And it was an outrage that he was taking the most vulnerable little children in New York and he was doing medical experiments on them. Not to mention the medical experiments that he was doing on beagles and all the other animals, right? And so Fauci's history actually goes back a long way. And here's one of the key things that people don't talk about enough. What has the United States been doing at Fort Detrick, Maryland? What they've been doing, that used to be an offensive bioweapons program. It was that was shut down by Richard Nixon in the late 60s. And what did they continue? Oh, we now have a bioweapons defense program. So we don't make bioweapons, we defend against them, which is the sleight of hand that governments always use. And what people don't ask enough is what were the original Nazi programs that were brought under Operation Paperclip from World War II, from the death camps, from the Joseph Mengeles, and they were continued at Fort Detrick, Maryland, and at Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah and other places where people like Fauci, right, have continued the work of the Nazis. And one of the reasons they went absolutely, can I say batshit crazy on your show? Okay, they went absolutely batshit crazy when I said on Fox News that Fauci says he's science. They asked me, they said, Fauci was on Margaret Brennan's show, Face the Nation, saying, I am science. If you criticize me, you criticize science. And they said, what do you think of that? And I said to Pete Hegseth and Will Cain on Fox News, I said, well, I talked to a lot of doctors and other people. I said, they don't see Fauci as science. They see him more as Dr. Joseph Mengele. Why did that matter so much? This is partly an answer to your first question. It mattered so much because of something called the Nuremberg Code. You want to know why in Europe they weren't able to force people the way they did in the United States, which is ironic because we have a Bill of Rights and a Constitution, right? But it was because of the Nuremberg Code. Because as a result of the evil, the pure, abject, unspeakable cruelty and evil of Dr. Joseph Mengele, the Nazi doctor of death, and what the Nazis did in their concentration camps, you have something called the Nuremberg Code, which was set up to prevent things like Mengele and those Nazi programs from ever happening again, forcing people into medical experimentation against their will. And you know what happened right after I came out and made that comment about Fauci and Mengele? Is the head of the European Union, she came out and said, maybe it's time for Europe to talk about ending the Nuremberg Code, because we need to have mandatory vaccinations across Europe. So what they were doing in America, they planned to do in Europe. The Nuremberg Code still applies here. It's the basis of informed consent. That's what informed consent is all about. And let me tell you, Benny, we don't know our history enough, because when I looked into this, I found a unit in the Japanese military, Unit 731. I would urge people, I don't even think that you can speak publicly about some of the things that they did in Unit 731, experimenting on mainly Chinese prisoners, but also others, Russians and others. And we bought that research, just like we bought the Nazi doctors over. We gave a free pass to them, and we gave a free pass to the Japanese, who unleashed their bioweapons on Chinese in Manchuria. And we have backed medical experimentation. So the reason they protect Fauci, the Democrats protect him because they don't want to admit that he was used as a weapon to steal the 2020 election from Donald Trump. But much bigger than that, at much higher levels beyond Anthony Fauci and Donald Trump, are the people who are fully in favor of medical experimentation on human beings, who are quite in favor of population control, of reducing populations, of sterilizing young girls, the Bill Gateses of this world, who have sterilized young girls from Sudan all the way to India with their vaccines that are supposed to help people. And beyond him to his father, who was a co-founder with Margaret Sanger of Planned Parenthood, who were talked openly about genetics, right? And about these programs to reduce the black population. And I know a bunch of people that work in pro-life organizations, especially in the black community. And they are very angry still about the fact that you have all these abortion clinics in black neighborhoods and you don't have them at the same intensity and degree in other neighborhoods, right? And that's because we're talking about the same programs that Margaret Sanger and Bill Gates' father talked about. These eugenics programs are the same things that the Nazis talked about. Okay, it's the same thing all the way through. And what they don't want you to do, the reason they call every person that looks like you and me a white supremacist and a Nazi, is because they're the real Nazis. They've been covering for the Nazis, protecting the Nazis, continuing Nazi programs, funding Nazis in Ukraine, arming Nazis in Ukraine, and honoring Nazis in the Canadian Parliament, and so on and so on and so on. So in one sense, Fauci is the bagman for the mob, right? And he knows too much, and they got to make sure he doesn't go down. But in another sense, this goes far beyond Anthony Fauci. And if you peel back the layers on COVID, it will reveal what they did with HIV. It will reveal what they're doing with other bioweapons. Perhaps Ebola was a bioweapon, because I'll tell you, when I was on that frontline treatment center, the local people in Liberia said to me, where did Ebola come from? Like, where does Ebola come from? And I brought an American scientist who was with me, because I was doing this for 60 minutes. We were reporting for 60 minutes. And I said, ask him. He's a scientist. He knows. And he was a lovely man. He explained the whole connection between the bats and zoonotic diseases and how this crosses when people eat the bats. It comes into the human population. And these grave diggers, you know what they said to him, Benny? It was absolutely fascinating. They looked at him, they listened, and they looked at him. And then one of the guys said, he said, my father ate the bats, and we know Ebola. And my grandfather ate the bats, and we know Ebola. And his grandfather and father ate the bats. They didn't buy it. So you have all these people across America who say, oh, yeah, it came from the wet market. It came from the bats. No, it did not come from the bats. It is a human engineered bioweapon. And Dr. Fauci, their little doctor of death, he was the main guy that was doing all their dirty work for him. And this is the guy who sleeps well at night, knowing that pregnant women have died, manipulating the data. And by the way, just like reporters at CBS, I just read a thing they did before I came on, to see how they were reporting it. And they're literally justifying it. I mean, women in their first trimester died at rates matching the vaccine rate of women in their first trimester. That's an actual study that they have just chosen to ignore. Absolutely chosen to ignore. I don't know when they went so far and lost their way so badly that journalists are willing to run cover for scientists who preside over the death and suffering of millions of people for political and personal gain. If that's what you call journalism today, then my God, righteous anger doesn't cover it.